Hey there, friends. This is Brian. It is Monday evening, actually getting into Monday night. But I wanted to whip off this quick little video. I'm sorry for the low lighting in here. It's a little dark in my dungeon. Um, Today at the Maryland Hall camp, we covered all kinds of stuff. So many great friends and so much more great stuff to come this week. But we ran into a couple hiccups with the power, and the servers got cut off once or twice and had to reboot. And I did not get everything out in my interval masterclass that I wanted to. So just think of this as a completion of that, a little bonus you can watch at your leisure. Hopefully to answer also a lot of the questions that I saw coming into the comments regarding the intervals and specifically building chords. So to pick up where we left off, if you remember, I had gone through talking about, remember what an interval is, just the distance between two notes. And it doesn't matter what notes I have. If the distance stays the same, it creates a very specific sound. And we have 12 of those sounds. So instead of thinking about music being made of 12 notes, if we think of it as these 12 distances, they can be used to build every chord, every riff, every scale. Now, we started with the riff from Jessica from the Allman Brothers. And we looked at how it fit within an interval structure and not thought of it as fret numbers, okay? That riff happens over an A chord. Any riff that you learn, if you know what chord it's being played over, or what root note, what reference tone it's being played over, whether it's just a bass note or a chord, in this case A, I find one A note in there. We use these orbital patterns I was showing you. So here, remember, wherever we have a root note, diagonally down is a third. The fifth is 1.5 steps above that, or it makes that power chord shape. Fifth can also be found on the same fret as the root on the string above it. So wherever I have a root, just remember these three that orbit around it. There's my third, there's my fifth, and there's another fifth down there. Every other interval, all 12 of them, can be found from those three. If we know where any time we have a root, if we can find our third and fifth orbiting around it, any other interval I need. If I need a 2, a whole step above a 1, or a whole, look, I'll show you on here. If I have a root, I think you can see my pointer here. If you see this root, a 2 would be a whole step above it, right? Here, let's do this. There's a root in red. Well, if I need a 2, whole step above it, which also you see ends or belongs right there a whole step below the 3. If I need a 4, I can find any 3 and move up a half step. That would give me a 4, which you also see, look, it's a whole step below a 5, right? Any way that you want to get to it, you can. Anywhere I have a root, go down a half step, I can get a major 7th. Go down another half step, and I have that minor 7th, or the flatted 7th we talked about. Go down another half step, I have a 6th. And you can see here, look, I'm creeping up on this 5th. I'm a whole step above a 5th is a 6th. It doesn't matter which way we go, we'll get to the same answer. All we need to know, if we know this caged pattern, we'll know where our roots, thirds, and fifths are. They don't ever change. So we looked at the riff, the Jessica riff that started here. It was 5th, root, 3rd, 4th, 5th, back down. 4, 3, root, 5, 4, 3. Now, we talked about modifying it, changing it, making it minor, taking both of the thirds that land in it and moving it down a half step. So instead of playing my third, play it as flat third. There's another third there. What if I wanted to create a diminished sound? I know we haven't talked about that yet, but what a diminished sound is a flatted third like we just did and a flatted fifth. So take my fifths, like started on a 5th. Again, remember, when you're playing this riff, think or say out loud the intervals as you play them. So you start thinking of the shape. Now, the other thing to think about is what I'm playing here is the D shape. The D shape never changes. Where the intervals landed, there never changes. So once you start thinking about this, as soon as you go to the D shape, it's going to start feeling familiar. You're going to remember where the 5s are, where the 3s are, and you'll be able to grab a 2nd or a 6th or a major 7th. I mean, there's only so many of them, right? If you deal with the chord tones first, there's only a couple color tones left. So all of these things start to fall into place with riffs and chords. So if I wanted to make a diminished sound, I take there's a fifth, so I flatten it. Root, third, flatten it. So flat fifth, root, flat third, fourth. Instead of that fifth, I do a flat fifth. So I have kind of totally different sound, right? I just played Jessica as a diminished riff, okay? You can, instead of modifying it or changing notes, I could go back to major and start adding notes, adding twos. There's a 3, so there's a 2, or there's a 1, there's a 2. A sixth, there's a fifth, so a whole step above. If I wanted to add a major seventh, find a root, move it half step down. So what happens is they just become shapes now that make sense, and you understand all the ingredients that are happening around it. So you can experiment and listen to what each of these intervals sounds like. What does it sound like when I add a sixth, when I have my third as major? What happens when I add a sixth, but I have a flatted third or a minor third? So now let's get into talking about building chords with this. Now, I've been alluding to them and I've been talking about them, but I really haven't described them in detail yet. So, sorry about that. Let me get that out of the screen. Okay. So here's how we're going to think about this. What we want to do is we want to understand, we're going to just start off with the basics, but we want to understand when we hear a chord name, we want to turn that name into a series of numbers. Now, if you notice, I have it written down here, major, 1, 3, 5, right? That is the formula. Those are the intervals that build every major chord. Any major chord being played on a piano or a guitar or any instrument, if it's just a plain major chord, those are the intervals that are being played from the root note. So if it's an F major chord, it will have the first, third, and fifth of F. When we get into changing it to minor, what we have to do is we change our third to a flatted third. Yeah, that's not supposed to look like that. Oh, that's better. So let's say for this A shape right here, here's my third, I'll make it red. Well, what I do is I flatten that third, and that gives me minor in the A shape if I were to play these red notes. I only had to change that one. If you notice, within the E shape, my third is right here. I move that down. My D shape, my third is there. But look at the C shape. There's a third here, and there's a third here. There's two thirds in there, and one of them is an open string. That's why you don't often see people changing a C-shaped chord in its open position to C minor. They'll typically go to a bar chord for that. But it's not that you can't. Look, what if I started off with all, here, just putting the red dots on a regular open position C chord. If I wanted to play C minor in this form, I could flatten this third. I can't flatten an open string anymore. But what if I were to put my pinky on the third fret and play that fifth? Because that's a chord tone. So instead of playing this, I flatten this third, and then I put my pinky, or I even just play a portion of it. The thing is with these chords is that sometimes you're playing a portion of a very familiar chord, a regular C chord shape, or an A chord shape, or an E chord shape. But because you've moved a note or maybe changed your hand position, it doesn't look familiar anymore, and you don't necessarily relate that, oh, this is just a C chord that I've done this to. Now, I'm going to use that idea to show you how to take any of these shapes and turn them into all kinds of fancy name chords by understanding the numbers. Okay, now I'm not going to cover every single chord possible right now, but that's not that hard to do if you understand the patterns. So just remember this. When you hear a major chord, you hear the term major, or if it doesn't say the word minor at all, it's assumed major. So instantly in your head, think 1, 3, 5. Okay, that's our building block. So when you hear major, go 1, 3, 5. Minor, think 1 flat 3, 5. then if there's something else to the name, we have to figure out what has been added or what has been possibly changed, okay? You could think of the minor as a change, right? It's just a major chord that we've done a change to, flat in our third. A diminished chord is 1 flat 3 and a flat 5, the diminished triad. But we're really going to start, let's focus more on different types of major and minor chords. Altered chords are kind of a whole nother side thing to worry about. You're going to run into a lot more major and minor chords than you do diminished chords, especially in the beginning. So let's focus on just understanding those. So I'm going to start off with the easiest interval to add. We have basically 4 other types of color sounds that we can add. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? We've used 1, 3, 5. We have 2, 4, 6, and 7 left. What happens when we add 2s to the name of a chord, or 4s, or 6s, or 7s? I said I'm going to start off with the easiest one, is the 6. If I have a major chord that I add a 6th interval to, not a capital, not a, excuse me. This chord is just known as a 6th chord. We don't have to say the word major, it's assumed. And actually, we don't want to say the word major, and I'll explain why in a second. So when you see a 6th chord, it doesn't say minor, so I think 1, 3, 5, and then we add this color tone of a 6th. So how do I do it? Well, let's say I want to do it in the shape of an A chord. There's a root. Let's start, well, let me just block off the whole A shape. Now, all of these right now are all the C chords all over the neck in the caged forms. But if you know the A shape, remember there's only these 5 shapes, the C shape, the A, G, E, and D. That's how they map across the neck. So if I know this A-shaped chord and I can turn it into a 6th chord, I can move it up and down the neck. If I learn it in an open position, any of these chords can be turned into a 6th chord. So what I want to do is look at my notes here and figure out what's the easiest way for me to find a 6th. Well, I have 2 5ths. Those would be one of the easiest thing to move. I could move that one up here, and I get this. It's a little bit of a stretch, right? But it's doable if you want to look super fancy to your friends. Or I could have done this. I could move that 5th up a whole step. They sound different, right? So the difference is we either put the 6th in a lower frequency range, a lower octave within the chord, or up here on the top of the chord. It's going to sound different. Where you put the color notes, where you put your thirds, change the way it sounds. So experiment. But this is a great, easy way to play a 6th chord, just taking the A-shaped chord and going straight across, getting all D, G, B, and E strings across on like as a bar. Another way you might see people playing a 6th chord. Watch this. What if I played it like this? Doesn't look like an A chord anymore, does it? Doesn't really look like an A shape. I'm playing 3rd fret, 5th fret, 2nd fret, 5th fret. Now this, I know is a 6th. I could have either counted down from a root, major 7th, flat 7th, 6th. Or I can see down from the C shape of the C chord down here. That's a 5th. So a whole step up must be a 6 also. But this is just a regular A bar chord that I've taken this note and moved it down 3. I have to get rid of the bar now. I can't, but if I'm not trying to play this extra 5th all the way up top, now it just becomes a 4-string chord instead of a bar chord. It is still a little bit of a stretch, but it's a cool sounding inversion. Now, if you were to see me playing this up at the neck, here I'm playing it as a G. You probably wouldn't see my hand position and go, oh, that's just an A bar chord that he's moved that down. It all of a sudden doesn't look familiar. That's what we want to start seeing, that every weird chord you see somebody in their hands is nothing but a caged shape that this has been done to. It just looks different now that you've stretched your hands out in a different way. But all that is this chord, that note, the root note, has been moved down to a 6th. Show you really common moves within this as we talk about the next one. So if I wanted this chord, if I saw a piece of paper that said, please play a minor 6th chord, and it might not say minor 6. It might probably just say 6, right? Play me a minor 6 chord. What do I have to do here? We've already added the 6. We just need to flatten our third. Blip. So we take this third, move it down here, and we could grab this 6 up here now, wherever we want to try it. So now it becomes, now I'm starting to run out of fingers, so you can play, you can skip a string. Like here, I'm just actually skipping the A string and playing a root, this root, or I could play this 5th and just not play the G and get my flatted third here, half step below that third, and my 6th up here. I could do this other version where I played the 6th down here, just like we did before. So it'd be a root, 5th, 6th, right? Because whole step above a 5th, half step, there's my flat third. And now I get this cool. Again, it's a very different looking chord. It doesn't look like an A bar chord anymore, but that's all this is. It's just an A-shaped bar chord that I've moved 2 notes in, and the formula, a 6th chord will always contain those intervals. A riff could have those intervals. A scale could have those, or an arpeggio. It still has this sound, okay? This flat third means it sounds minor. The 6th has a very specific color to it, and the more you start to hear these and recognize what it is, after a while, you might start to recognize, oh, that sounds like that 6th. Like, to me, the Beatles were my big reference for a lot of 6 chords. That was a big, where is that? That, like, the last, they would love to end it on these 6 chords. What I'm playing here is an E6 in the E shape. I'm doing this shape here, this E chord shape right here, and I'm taking this 5th that would be an open string in the open form and moving it up a half step with my pinky. So imagine this across here as my open strings would be open, second, second, first, second, open. But that pinky that I'm putting on the second, and if I put my pinky up a half step higher, right there, we get a flatted 7th, right? We get that. A lot of you have probably played an E7 chord that way. So that's our next note we're going to talk about, 7ths. So 1, 3, 5 makes up our chords. Flat 3 is minor, natural third is major. We've looked at adding 6th. Now what happens when we add 7ths? So I talked about this briefly, and it's written on this thing here. There's 2 kinds of 7s we want to think about. There's the major 7th, which is the natural 7th, the one that lives a half step below a root, right? Or a whole step above a 6th, right? That is the jazzy 7th. So here's a D chord, right? And you picture this, I'm playing a D shape chord down in the open thing. If I take this root note and move it down a half step, and I get almost what looks like an A chord moved over, I would get open, second, 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 right? I get that. D with that root note moved down a half step gives me a D major 7th. It's the jazzy, pretty 7th chord, okay? Half step down more gives me a flatted 7th, this note. If you look at any 7th chords that you learn, if you learn something called let's say you learn an E7, here's an open chord, and they lift off the middle note of these 3 to open, or an A7, where that middle note is lifted off to open, or a D7, where the 3rd fret of the B string is moved down to the 1st fret, or moved down a whole step. All of those moves are taking a root note, in this case, here's the A shape, right? Taking that root note and moving it down a whole step to a flatted 7th. The flatted 7th is a whole step below root. E7 could be this root and the root note moved down a whole step. You can also find that same interval right here, right? Play it with your pinky in an E shape, but you can see that's a 5, 6, half step up to a flatted 7. So here's the way to think about flatted 7ths and natural 7ths, the names, and how to decipher all that. When you see a 7 in a name, G7, A minor 7, B flat minor 7, E flat 7, it doesn't matter. You just see a 7 and you don't see the word major in your brain, just always remember flatted seventh. It's always a flatted or a dominant seventh unless the word major is present in the chord name. So if a D major 7 is not talking about a D major chord, that's understood. We already know it's a 1-3-5. The word minor is not there. That word major is talking about the type of 7, not the type of chord. It's talking about the color note. So G major 7. So this chord, any chord that says, oh, I lost my text. Any chord that says major 7, sometimes you'll also see it written as a triangle, as a shortcut, or you'll see the whole word major. Or sometimes, if it's super abbreviated, it will be capital M 7. Some people will write it that. I typically will write it MAJ 7. That chord is built with the basic triad chord tones. Super low tech today. This was not planned. 1, 3, 5. I've got my basic major chord triad. We just add a 7. There's a major 7 voicing. Take any of these chords along here, take any root note that you can and move it down. This is one you'll see a lot of people playing just as a partial chord. You'll see it, this E shape. But instead of playing the whole chord, you can play the bottom 3 strings like you may have learned an F chord in a kind of an easy way in the beginning. And we move this root note down a half step. And now we get almost like this stair step, 1 fret down of each string. That's an E shape of a major 7 that comes from this. It's just that one note moved down. And then all these are played just as the E shape normally would be. But it doesn't look like an E-shaped chord or feel like an E-shaped chord at first. But if you realize we just aren't playing the bass 2 strings and we've moved 1 note down, it's still just an E shape, major 7, okay? If I wanted to play a chord that had this note, a flatted 7th, that just becomes a 7th chord. So a 7th chord, always just think flatted 7. Whenever you see the number 7, get the habit of think flat 7 and then look for the word major. If the word major is present, oh, it's a natural 7. But if I see this chord, like C, let's say we want a C minor 7th chord. What do we have to do? The minor is telling us we have to flatten that 3rd. Good gracious. All right. So this part of the chord right here, highlighted, that's just giving us our minor part of the chord. Then this is the 7th. We just call it a 7th. We don't have to call it a flat 7th. So how would we play that? Let's find a shape. Let's do an A shape. I'm going to just start off with all the regular notes of an A shape. First, what we're going to do, let's address the minor. We'll find our 3rd, move that down, flat 3rd. Now we have a C minor chord in the A shape. And now we're perfectly in tune. Now what we want to do is find a way to play flatted 7th. 2 ways to get a flatted 7th. From a root note down a whole step, like this. 1, 2. C minor 7 in the A shape. Or I could take a 5 and move it up 1.5 steps. 5, whole step to 6, half step to sharp 6 or flat 7th. So I could play either or both. I could play this or that. Doesn't really matter. I'm just putting an extra flatted 7th on top. You know, if you had enough fingers and you wanted to try that, you could do that too. Doesn't really matter. What about the E shape? Start off with a regular E chord. There's got to be a quicker way to do this. Somebody needs to invent a program that helps me take my little diagrams and animate them properly. Okay, make it minor. Take our flatted 3rd, or a 3rd, flatten it. Now we have C minor in the E shape, right? 7, well, here we go. Take this root, move down a whole step. We get you know, basically all we have to do, bar all the way across, but fret one other note, get this fifth right here. Or if I've got my pinky left and I want to put my pinky up here like this, I can get another seventh, right? Because that's a 5, whole step up to 6, half up to 7, or a whole step down from that root. So this, again, doesn't look like an E bar chord anymore. You'll also see people playing it like this. I start playing chords often not in full bar chords, just in portions. Like I might play a minor 7 like this. Because without the bar, I can really separate. I can separate bass note and chords. I can do other movements where my thumb is holding the bass note. I'm flattening across to get this flat 7th, flat 3rd, and 5th. But I can move more than when I have my hand in a bar chord position. Often, I can get so many different types of chords just from this E shape, starting off with keeping my bass root note here, and then I get a root 3rd and 5th like this. If I want to hear what it sounds like to play just a 7th chord like that, dominant 7th, move that down, and now I get root, flat 7th, 3rd, and 5th. And it doesn't look like an E bar chord anymore because I'm not playing all 6 strings. I'm just getting in this case for C, it would be the 8th fret of the E string, skip the A, 8th fret of the D, 9th fret of the G, 8th fret of the B. But now if I want to do because I don't have the bar, it makes it easy to do fancier chords. Let's say I wanted to do C7. We're going to get really fancy here. Sharp 5. But that's not a sharp. Sharp 5, augmented 5th. Well, a C7 chord would just be these notes, right? Without the sharp 5, it's just these. But the chord is telling me what to do. Raise your 5th up a half step. If I'm playing a bar chord, look at the full E bar chord. There's 2 5ths, and it gets kind of convoluted to try to raise them both. But if I'm doing this little portion of a chord where I'm getting each interval one time, well, there's my 5th. Just move it up a half step. Now I get this. Root, flat 7th, 3rd, sharp 5th, right? What if I wanted, I didn't change it down here. That's what it would look like, right? And that's how I play it. What if it was the other way around? What if I got C7, flat 5? It's telling me what to do. I take my 5 and I flatten it down here. I couldn't really do that as easy with that note as a bar chord. You can't play lower than a bar chord from that finger. But if I'm playing like this, I could rearrange my hand and play like that. I could also have played it like this. Put the flat 5 here. Root, flat 5th, flat 7th, and 3rd. And remember, I didn't change that, but that's what we're looking at right there. C7, flat 5. I like this shape a little better personally because I like the sound of that flat 5 a little bit higher than here. I think somebody mentioned this chord in one of the chats today, a minor 7, flat 5. Again, name sounds really big and fancy, but all we have to do to change that, well, 7, always flat 7. The word major isn't present, so it's always a flat 7, right? It's telling me to flat the 5, and the minor just means flatten the 3rd. So root, we've got that. We've got our flat 7. We did move that down. We've got our flat 5. Let's move our 3rd down to a flatted 3rd. And now I have 8th fret, skip the A string, 8th on the D, 8th on the G, and 7th on the B. And I have a C minor 7, flat 5. And of course, I can now move that anywhere. And what that is nothing but an E chord, bar chord, that I moved notes down in. It doesn't look like an E chord anymore. It doesn't have to look like an E chord to come from the E shape. And another way I like to remember these things is that, like, look at this little shape right here of these 3 notes. It looks like an A minor bar chord, right? It looks like an E flat bar chord in the A minor shape. Like if I had this, note here, and even that one there, there's the A shape of a minor bar chord. Well, a good way to think of what the minor 7 flat 5 looks like an A minor bar chord where we just put the root note on the same fret as those. So when I was first learning chords like this, I would take like, well, I want a minor 7 flat 5 for A. Well, I think of it as like this A minor shape, and I just put an A note on the bass, and I have the shape, okay? All right, so we jumped way ahead on some kind of fancier chords, but that's how you want to think of the sevens. Always think flatted 7 unless the word major is present. Okay, we're going to talk about 2s and 4s next, and that'll be it for tonight. So 2s and 4s, there's a couple little quirky rules in the name. First, we had some questions about what does this mean? What does suspended mean? This is where we get 2s and 4s will give us our options for suspended chords, but they can do more than that. But let's start off talking about suspended chords. So a C, if you see this written like C2 or C4, is usually a shorthand version of what this should be called, C sus2 or C sus4. That's really typically what is meant with those. And what the sus means, suspended, think of it like this. We're suspending the major or minorness of the chord. We're getting rid of its major or minorness sound. What note creates the sound of major or minor? The third, right? Natural third is the sound of major, flatted third is the sound of minor. So what are the 2 and the 4? They're the 2 notes that surround the third, right? The easy way to remember our suspended sounds. Third is our sound of major and minor. To suspend our sound of major and minor, what do? We don't add a 2 or a 4. We get rid of our third and move it down to a 2 or up to a 4. The first one that most guitar players learn, take a good old D shape and put our pinky down on the 3rd fret. And look at the D shape on this here. Open string would be a root, 5th, root, there's my 3rd. If I put my pinky down right here on a D shape, not only have I haven't added a 4th specifically, I've replaced my 3rd with a 4th. I've gotten rid of the only 3rd in that shape. So a C sus4 or a D sus4 would actually be 1, 3, 5, 4, but we actually get rid of that. It's a 1, 5. It's back to a 3-note chord. A sus2 would be the same thing, but just the other way around. We could do the same thing with the D chord. If this here, remember, here's a root note, so diagonally down is a 3rd. Remember, this is the same shape we used for Jessica. D shape, right? If I take that 3rd and move it up half step and cover up my 3rd, I now have a 1, 4, and a 5. I have a sus4. If I lift that off and play the open E string, I've moved this 3rd down a whole step. 3rd down a whole step is a 2, right? So now I have a sus2. Sus chords can be really cool sounding, sus4 chords, because they don't have that major or minor quality. A couple songs like that whole song is built on root, 5th, and then that would be root 5th of an octave right there. If I have an octave and I move it up a whole step, I'm playing a 2, right? 1, 5, 2, 1, 5, 2, 1, 5, 2. That whole song is built mainly on sus2 chords, and it sounds there's more color and flavor than just power chords, but it's not as specific as minor, major, major, minor, right? It's very piano sounding to me. There's this kind of cool openness, new flavors, but without getting really, a sus2 could be played in place of a major chord or a minor chord. Because there's no 3rd there, it's not going to conflict, right? So that is typically how you will see, anytime you see the word sus, that's what you want to think of. Remember, the 3rd has been replaced. If it doesn't say, if it just says C sus, assume they mean 4. Your most common, so C sus would be 1, 5, and a 4. Saying C sus4 just really is making sure, or C4 is making sure they realize that's the kind of suspension. So typically it'll be written as C2 or C sus2 to give us this chord. All right. So One other little thing, and we're essentially done. And I'm going to go through a couple. I'm going to talk about a chord that Benji brought up today, what he called the Hendrix chord. And I'm going to explain a few cool things around that, where that shape came from. So not just the theory behind it, but looking at the shape of it on here. So the other thing with 2s and 4s is you can add a 2 and a 4. We can have this chord. We can have 1, 3, 5, and a 4. Of course we can. We can do whatever we want, but that has to have a name too, right? Well, to get to that name, we're going to kind of come backwards from something else. Many of you may have run into chord names that the numbers go higher than 7, and all we've talked about here are 1 through 7, right? There's two ways you can think of the numbers that come beyond 7. And really, they're both right. You can really do it any way that makes sense and is usable to you. One thing is that if you look at chords 1, 2, 3, or scales 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but you take this second octave, and instead of calling it that, what would be 1 we think of as 8, and 2 would actually be 9. It's not. And 3 would be 10, 4 would be 11, so forth. So the idea would be that a 9 is just a 2 in the next octave. And that's not totally incorrect. That's one way that it is often referred to. Here is how I think of these in terms of chords. It makes more sense to me. Again, their music can be confusing because there's multiple correct ways at looking at all kinds of things. The idea for me is what's the quickest and shortest way to get the answer that I need so I can stop thinking and just go back to hearing and playing music and following my ear and my gut, and not have to make it about over complexity, right? So when we talk about chords, just remember this. We've talked about our chord tones, every other note, 1, 3, 5. The most common next note that we're going to run into, and in a lot of cases will be looked as a chord tone, or is the 7. But, in jazz harmony, almost everything is harmonized. The basic chords are all 4-note chords. So just a G chord would be almost always played as a G major 7 at the very least. And then a dominant chord or a flat 7th chord would be a G7. That leaves us with 2s, 4s, and 6s that are left, our color notes that we just talked about. When we talk about 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths, those are the 3 numbers that we see above 7, 9, 11, and 13. Okay. 9 would be the 2, 11 would be the 4, and the 13 would be the 6. We don't need a 10 because the 3rd is in the chord already. So whether it's there or at another octave, it doesn't matter. So this is why I think this makes more sense to me and I find it more useful. When I see these 3 numbers, don't think of it necessarily as, oh, I just realized you can't see those down there, can you? There we go. Don't think of these necessarily as another octave. Think of these as 2 notes are creating a 9. 2 notes are creating a 13. 2 notes are creating 11. So think of once we get into these numbers, we always have this. We always have 1, 3, 5, and 7. So a 9 would contain the note that we add to 7 to get 9. So a 9 is a 7 and a 2. An 11 is a 7 and a 4. And a 13 is a 7 and a 6. So anytime you see a number above 7, just remember it's the 7 plus whatever else I need to get there. And our 3 color tones that are not chord tones that we see, 2s, 4s, and 6s, are even numbers, right? So that's all we're left with. So when you see 9, just think it's 7. A 7 and a 2 give us our 9. When we see an 11, 7 and a 4. We see a 13, 7 and a 6. So let's look at some of those shapes. Now, more specifically though, remember, I've been saying a 9 is a 7, but specifically what kind of 7 is it? It's always flat 7, right? So a 9th chord, if I see this written like play me a C9 chord, let's turn it into numbers. What numbers are there? Well, let's start off with the building blocks. 1, 3, 5. We don't have the word minor, so it's there. I see a number above 7, so I put 7 plus whatever equals that. So it's 7 plus a 2. We're almost there. Remember, the only time we have the natural seventh, the only time we have this, the word major has to be present. So what we have here is a C major 9, or a major ninth. It could be, doesn't have to be C. This formula is a major ninth for every chord. If I want just a basic C9, we flatten our 7. It's always a flatted 7th. So let's look at how we would play both. Let's go to a regular old C chord in the C shape. We're going to turn it into a ninth, then we're going to turn it into a major 9, and then we're going to turn it into a couple other things. So here we have a C. Let's say we want to turn it into a C9. I need to add 2 notes to it now, where before a 7th chord we just needed to find 1. So I need to find a place to get a flat 7 and a 2. Whatever is easiest and quickest to find. So let's try, well, here's a root note. I can move it up, and that gives us our 2. So the 2 is now taken care of. We don't have to mess with our 3rd because it's not minor. I could look at finding a 7th. I could look at this A shape above it. You see this root here? I can move that root down, and this becomes a flat 7. Or I could think of this 5th as 5th, whole step up to a 6, half step up to a sharp 6 or a flat 7. So that would give me root, 3rd, flat 7, 2. Now, and if I wanted to flatten this across, I could get the 5th too if I wanted. So that becomes this chord. And you may have played this chord often. You'll see it a lot of like this little straight flat across thing, the little R&B funk chord is a 9th chord. And this shape you could have thought of as the C shape where we've moved these notes up, or the A shape that we've moved them down. This area between the C and the A shape in the cage always just exists, so you could think of it as either or both. It doesn't matter. But the only 2 notes that stay true to the original shape chord are this root and this 3rd. We move that 5th up to get a flatted 7th right there. That root up a whole step to get a 2. Now, if we didn't want to play that and we just played these 4 notes, that's fine too. If you omit the 5th, you don't have to change the name. The 5th can almost be thought of sometimes as a little bit of a filler note. It definitely adds something, but piano players like Benji was showing, I mean, you've got 10 fingers and can get these really dense chords. Guitar players, especially, and you don't have the wide range of octaves that you can stretch out on piano. Guitar things are closed a lot more, so sometimes putting too many notes crammed in the same octave get a little bit muddy sometimes. So if you were going to remove any note in this chord, you have a 5-note chord. If you're having a hard time reaching one, you go, I don't really have a good way to get the 5th. It's okay. If I leave the flat 7th out, it's no longer a 9th chord, right? If I leave the 2 out, it's just a 7th chord. If I leave the 3rd out, it takes away the major and minor quality. So the 5th is the most expendable voicing in there. Sometimes you'll even see people leave the root out, especially in a band situation. If the bass player's pedal in a G note and you're playing a G9 chord, but you leave out a G note, it's okay. It's still being accounted for. But let's take the same chord and look around. What if we wanted to make it a major 9, right? Well, all we have to do is make a natural 7th, right? A 7 and a 2 is a major 9. So this was our flatted 7th right here. We move it up a half step to a half step below our root. So now we have root, 3rd, major 7th, half step below the root, not a flatted 7th, and the 2. This is that. It's like the first chord in Lenny. It's No Such Thing from John Mayer. It's a beautiful chord. You can play it in multiple shapes, but this chord doesn't feel anything like playing that funky music chord, which is just 1 note different. It's just one has a flat 7th, one has a natural 7th, but they feel very different to play because of your hand position. That's why guitar makes this a little harder. Piano, it's very visual. You're just like, oh, I can see I've just moved this note 1. When you have to change your hand position, all of a sudden sometimes it's hard as a guitar player to recognize that you're just playing, oh, this is just the same chord. The 1 note difference feels very different because of the way I have to hold my hand, but looking at it on paper sometimes clears that up. Here's the Hendrix chord. that Benji was talking about. This. Now that's for C, but it's played in E, right? Sharp 9. Now, sharp 9 is a short name for it. But typically you're going to see it written like this. 7 sharp 9. All right? So let's think about that. This is about as weird as it gets as far as chord names. If this can make sense to you, this is it. This is all there is, right? Other than this, like, it's altered chords, which basically will tell us to flatten or sharp our 5 or our 2. So a sharp 9, well, it says 7, but I don't see the word major, so right away I'm going to flatten my 7. The word minor is not there, so my 3rd is fine, right? So the only thing that's left, it obviously is telling me to sharp or raise something. Well, if I raise my flat 7, that just brings it up to a natural 7. That would have been a major 9. I'm not going to sharp my 3. That becomes a 4. Sharpening my 5, it would have told me to sharpen my 5. So the only thing that's left, it must mean to sharpen my 2, which that's what it is. So this is what a sharp 9 chord is. So look, here's my 2, right? My root up a whole step. This is a 9th chord. Play that funky music, right? If I move this 2 up to a sharp 2, I get this Hendrix chord. If I wanted, what if I saw this? What if it said C7 flat 9? Obviously, we do a flat 2. It just goes this way. Now, if you notice in this example, I'm using 4 fingers. It's not a bar chord, so I'm just omitting the 5th. I don't have a good, easy way to reach the 5th, but it's not missed. Hendrix didn't play it, so I think you'll be fine if you don't either. So there's a flat 9. Sharp 9, 9, flat 9. Major 9 by moving our 7th up, right? But the flat 9, to me, like, very common in jazz, but in rock, like, one of the first places I remember hearing it was I Want You, She's So Heavy from the Beatles. Right? I know that may be an older reference for many of our viewers, but look it up. The Beatles, they're great. So, but let's go back to the sharp 9 chord or the flat 9 chord. Actually, no, the sharp 9 I think is more interesting for two main reasons. One is the name, and 2 is the harmonic structure that's happening. So the name, why don't we just call this, because calling it a 7 sharp 9 is kind of redundant, right? We know the flatted 7th. We know that 7th is in there by the 9th. The 9th chord is telling us 7 and a 2. Like if this were an 11th chord, we know it has 7 and a 4. If it's a 13th chord, it's a 7 and a 6, or a flatted 7th in all those cases, unless the word major is there. But why are we putting the name 7 sharp 9? It's pretty easy. It's just the idea of putting this accidental, this sharp here. Think about how we refer to note names and accidentals and how we refer to intervals and accidentals. We say C sharp, D flat, B flat. We say the letter name, then we put the accidental after it. When we talk about intervals, we do the other way around. We say flat 3rd, sharp 5th, flat 7th. So the accidental goes before. So if I was talking about a chord like a C, if I called it C sharp 9, you wouldn't know if I meant C sharp with a 9 or if I meant C with the sharp 9. So the redundant part of the name, the 7, which we already know is there, just comes out of the 9 just to give us a buffer so that this isn't causing confusion with the key of the chord, the letter name of the chord. So when people talk about the chord, like when Benji talked about it today, he was like, yeah, it's a sharp 9 chord. You can say sharp 9 because you go, okay, you're talking about a sharp 9 chord. That's a 1, 3, 5, flat 7, because it doesn't say major, and a sharp 2. I get it. But the moment you put a chord name in front of it, or a key, if I said, F sharp 9, I'm going to want to bring that, you'll hear people referencing the redundant part of the name. They'll call it 7 sharp 9. They'll go F sharp, F7 sharp 9. So you'll know that it's an F and not an F sharp with a ninth. I know that's a lot of, I'm just saying the same thing over and over, but hopefully that's clear. And if it's not, this is a video, so rewind it and watch my entire blabbering about that once again. And all right. So other than some altered chords, the only other chord I really didn't, type of chord I didn't go over, you'll see chords with like slashes in the name, like A/G, D/F sharp. Whenever you see that, that is the first part is the chord. The second part is the bass note. It's saying it's a D chord with an F sharp on the bass. It's not the root note on the bass. It's an inversion. Sometimes that note could be a chord tone like D/F sharp. We're just putting an F sharp, which is already in the chord. It's the third on the bass. A/G, I'm putting a note that's not already contained in the chord. So technically, there's a new interval. It's an A7, with a G on the bass. But you'll often just see it written A/G. Again, the main thing is as long as the name makes sense to you and you can find a way to play it. So the other thing we didn't talk about, add chords. Add chords are very quickly, an add chord is the in-between suspended and ninths and 11ths, okay? So remember, suspended was replacing our third with a 2 or replacing our third with a 4, okay? And then when we talk about a ninth chord, we've added a whole new note. We've taken 2 notes to get the 9. We've added a 7 and a 2, or a flat 7 and a 2, right? An add 9 chord is the one where we had, think of it like this. It's like a ninth chord, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, and a 2, where we actually add the 2, but not the 7, right? It's the add 9, add 11 chords are basically our suspended chords where the third was taken away, but our third is back. So an add 9 chord would be like, here is a C add 9 chord. If I take this root in this open position C, I take the first fret of the B string and I move it up a whole step to get a 2. I now have these intervals. I have root, third, fifth, 2, because I moved that root up a whole step, and a third. So I have this, right? It's not suspended because I still have thirds. Another way you'll see people playing this is like this. They'll, instead of playing the third on that string, they'll play the fifth, so you get this. It's like when you learn that G chord where you're playing both the B and E strings on the 5th fret or 3rd fret, and we just take these 2 and move it over and get that cool, every rose has its thorn C chord, or it's been in a million tunes, right? Like, nice and easy to take our G chord and move it over. That's a C add 9 chord, okay? Because we still have the third and the 2. It is not a C9 chord, which many people will often mistakenly call it, because they see the 9, they just assume add 9, 9, what's the difference? The difference is one has a flatted 7th and one doesn't. The 9 chord, we bring this 5th up and get that flatted 7th there. That's 9, the bluesy chord. The flat 7th, and if you go back to a little thing over here about the intervals, the flat 7th in a major context is a very bluesy sound. So the bluesy is the 9th chord. Add 9 is more open, airy. Same thing, and add 11 would just be the same thing with a 4. So I know we covered a lot, but the thing is, what we just talked about is everything about chord names, essentially. I mean, they're certainly, when we get into, you may run into a chord name that you're like, wait, he didn't talk about this. We didn't really get deep into diminished chords and augmented chords, even though technically we did altered chords that have augmented sounds because it's a sharp 5 sound. But if you get into jazz theory and playing, reading chord charts out of the real book, or, you're going to run into those chords a lot. But if you're sitting down with the real book, most of what I'm saying here probably already makes sense to you. This is for people who have been confused by chord names. whatever you do is you don't want to memorize random shapes that don't make sense to you and just put a name to it. It's a lot like trying to learn a language by somebody handing you a dictionary and just randomly learning words. It will take you decades to have a conversation by just flipping through a dictionary learning words. If you understand how to build chords, and when I see a chord name, I want to turn it into these numbers. If it doesn't say major or the word major is there, 1, 3, 5. Minor, flat net third. What else is in the name? Does it say 7 or number above 7? Instantly think flat 7, unless the word major is there, right? Because that major is talking about this type of 7, not the type of chord. I'm going to give you another chord name, and we'll just quickly plop out the things. Let's say we want a something. How about a C sus 7? We didn't really talk about this yet, but we can kind of make sense of it. Let's start off. Well, there's no minor, so just start off with 1, 3, 5. Remember what I said, when it says sus and it doesn't tell you whether it's the 2 or 4, assume they mean 4. So sus, think 4 unless it says otherwise. But we have to get a sus, we have to do 2 things. We don't add a 4. We replace our third with a 4. We suspend the major minor. So now we just have a C sus or a sus. Any sus is that. And it's telling us to add a 7. What kind of 7 always? Flatted 7th. There's a sus 7. Let's find a way to play it. Let's take an E shape. Let's start off with root. Like I said, I need a... If I was actually editing this video, we could make it nice and clean and sweet. But I'm just pretending we're live right now. Okay. We start off this. Let's make it sus first. We only have 1/3. Move it up a half step to a 4. We've got that taken care of. Now we just need a flat 7th. Where do we love, root notes down a whole step. Easiest flat 7th in the world. 1, 2. Boom. There's our flat 7. There's our sus 4. We're done. So we take this C chord. We can lift our pinky off. That gives us our flat 7. Now we have a pinky free to put over top of this third and make a sus 4. It's the Hard Day's Night chord, right? Obviously there's videos about how that's multiple instruments, but if you're going to play that with one chord, as close as you can get to that sound is sus 7. So hopefully that'll make sense. I know we covered a lot of ground. I'm sorry we didn't get to that live today. My next thing on Thursday is going to be taking numbers and looking at numbers in chords and learning how to put chords with one scale shape. We can try to take as many chord progressions as possible, and we're going to be able to take one scale shape and move it around the neck and try to make it fit to that. So if you're looking to improve your improvisational skills or just get started with learning how to improv, the trick to start with is you need the right scale to start with. So note choice and all that stuff can't really help until you understand the harmony of keys. It's not hard, I promise. So hopefully this made sense. There could be time throughout the week where if you have questions about this, feel free to put them up. If not, I may put this on as a private YouTube video or something for everybody. So if you put questions in the comments on there, it may take me a minute, but I will get back and try to answer them in the comments on the video wherever I post it. Have a good night. I'll see you guys soon.